I'll do that.
All
Gotcha.
right.
Okay.
Good.
So let's see here. And then I'm sharing now. So if you can just let me know if you can see the screen.
Yeah.
Perfect. Alrighty. So brief introduction about myself. My name is Rachel Stevenson. I work with the talent acquisition team at Huntington Bank. I have hired anything from high volume positions, which simply means usually it's like our teller positions. Those are, we most often fill those type of positions the most, to some of our corporate positions, whether that be business banking. Gosh, it's been our customer advocacy team, UAT testing, financial advisors. So a little bit of everything, a sprinkle of everything across the board, our call center. So I have a varied perspective, and love to hear questions about different types of interviews, just different questions you have about the process. I will tell you, this is my 14th year with the company. Have moved my way up from a teller position, and then navigated my way over to the human resources realm, through utilizing the benefits that we have here, which is phenomenal. But can really give some insight and perspective and background, and am very much so open to answering any questions that you have, about the interview process. There is no firm right and wrong, in the interview process. It's more of kind of sometimes a gut feel or navigation. Sometimes it's like a game, which is not a great answer to give because people don't like that. I could tell you people do not like the interview process. But I think that's simply because, there's no black and white. It is a very gray area. It can be like a dance. You have to kind of, flow along with it and kind of, get ahead of the game and try to understand where that's flowing. So, certainly not always fun news to hear, but that's why I want to kind of cover with you phone interviews, really just dig in and have you ask questions that you have. Anything that's like deep, dark, burning that you really have questions on, please let me know and we'll walk through accordingly. So, any questions before we begin?
How
Okay.
long have you been using that wonderful photo?
Which photo?
The one that we're seeing on the slide, that's very funny.
Oh gosh, well that one was, I think that was a stock photo that Tiffany had initially, but yes, that photo is probably realistic in that it's a panic. It's a panic moment when you get into an interview, unless you're an interview guru, which is good and bad. So. All right, well, let's move on. Feel free to stop along the way, ask any questions. If there's something, if I'm not taking a breath for a pause, please interrupt. I just want to make sure that we answer your questions as best possible. So I'll read from the screen a little bit, but we'll kind of talk about it. So many companies use phone interviews as an additional employment screening technique for a variety of reasons. So usually what we see is that it takes a lot more time to pull each person in person, schedule that, have them come in, sit them down, go through that process. So what they typically have is someone, either a manager or HR, that picks up the phone, and will spend about a brief amount of time on the phone to go through and ask questions. And really what that is, just being realistic, is to kind of narrow the candidate pool. So that first impression, or that first phone interview, you really want to make sure that you do what I would say a bang up job at working through that phone conversation, or presenting yourself in the best light possible. Because at that point, they're taking this large pool of people who are applying and narrowing it down to a smaller amount of people so they can move forward. I think we all understand that. But I think the thing that I want to impress upon you the most is we want to make sure that you are the person that's in that next round. So. All right, let's see here. And can we see the slide 3? I just want to make sure that you're still reflecting my screen.
Yep, I can.
Perfect. Okay, so how is a phone interview different from a face-to-face interview? The only difference is it's not face-to-face. So we should be taking them as seriously as a face-to-face. It seems as though it's informal. And I will tell you, and ladies, I don't know, and I'm not going to ask you how old you are. But back when I used to watch TV back in, like, I think it was the 80s or 90s, they had that, the detective show out there. So Columbo. I'm very nice and kind, and I do like people. But I tend to have a softer tone and a softer feel to my call. And that tends to put people at ease, which is good because I really want them to open up and talk to me. But at times people can be too relaxed, meaning that I've had people openly curse on the phone with me or use jargon that maybe they shouldn't, or slang words, or just say things inappropriately because they feel as though that we've become kind of friends. We are not friends. I might like you and I might think that you're a good candidate, but we're not friends and we're not that level. So, and I'm sure that, you know, we have kind of our wits about us, but just kind of sharing from my perspective that when you're on the phone with someone, even though they might have a casual tone or might be very welcoming or friendly, be very careful and guarded with that. You do want to be friendly and give a part of yourself. You want to show them who you truly are, but not to that level where we're on the back porch drinking a beer or having some wine, right? We don't want to get that far. So it's easy to attract. They talk about phoning it in. So people maybe are a little more lackadaisical about it and they're not as formal, or they might just not be present during that call. Again, because they can't see your body language, they can't see you, they can't see the sincerity, you really want to make sure that you are not phoning it in, that you are very much so aware of who you're talking to on the other end. Any questions so far? Okay, moving on. So start preparing in advance for a phone interview. Research the company, check their website and social media sites for helpful information. What I see at times is when you research the company, and I give a lot of do's and don'ts. So I give examples to kind of help with this. If you do have questions of your own, please let me know. But, you know, oftentimes when I'll open up a conversation, I'll ask, you know, what's making you choose Huntington? And I really don't want to hear, well, you guys have been in business for 150 years, or, you know, that type of thing. The things that I really, truly enjoy is, you know, I've been a customer there. I've utilized your products. I've been to your branches. I've seen the way that your staff treats their customers. I really enjoy that. Or, you know, I have a friend that worked at Huntington. They've said nothing. I want to hear more of an open, honest, nothing that's canned. I had someone one time that said, oh, well, you guys offer great, you have a checking accounts and CDs and you have some loans. And I'm like, that's so generic. You really want to get I guess the meat of it, you know, be genuine, have dialogue. So, you know, typically you're not going to apply for a company that, you know, has a terrible reputation. There are some companies you just know in any industry that you're in has terrible turnover. They don't treat their staff well. You're going to know that going in. So be very, very genuine about why you're choosing. Don't go over and above of what you need to say, but be genuine in your dialogue there, because that's helpful. And again, a lot of times you can check their website and social media for that helpful information. Or like right now, we have Pride Month going on. So you're going to see a lot of social media and hubbub around what companies are doing around Pride Month and that type of thing. So you can kind of mention that in your dialogue, that you've seen what's going on. It just shows them that you're engaged and you're watching what's going on. Reread the job posting so you know how to prepare. What I would suggest with that is either to keep the job posting in front of you, either via paper or on your computer. So that way, if the recruiter or the person interviewing you or phone interview on the other side asks you, if you have any questions outside of what's on the job description, you can even say out loud, you know, I have the job description up in front of me. I just want to look through it again really quickly because there's a lot of information there. I don't think there's questions I have outside of that, but the job description does not mention X, Y, or Z. You know, can you give me a little bit more information about that? So just kind of keep that present in mind, or even your phone, whatever is more comfortable for you, whatever technology you have. But if you don't have any technology to pull up the job description, I would strongly encourage ensuring that you have that at least printed out in front of you. Take some notes on the company that you might be able to incorporate in the interview. We talked about that earlier with researching the company. Arrange a quiet, distraction-free place to take the interview. I kind of want to talk about bias. There's so many layers of bias that we could talk about, but that is one thing that I would strongly encourage when we talk about a quiet, distraction-free place. It's not just so you can make sure that your mental state is there and that you can concentrate on the interview. I want to hear from you ladies as to maybe why we would want quiet, distraction-free. What kind of bias might an employer see or hear that might not move you forward in the process?
In some instances, a potential employer may think that because if you can't have a distraction-free environment, that may hinder your ability to be reliable on the job, possibly.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. Okay. Anything else?
Well, you talked about bias, excuse me, and I'm wondering if you are hinting towards people that maybe don't have their childcare secured before they start something as important as a phone interview, or is
Yes.
that what you had in mind?
Several layers. So, I mean, it could be that you're right. Do you have children that are running in the background? Does the employer, and I'm not, here's how I'll say this. This is not how we interview here, but I've interacted and run into several times where there has been implicit bias where the employer does not want to hire someone who has younger children. And you might not have younger children. Those might be your grandchildren. I mean, we don't really know what it is, but if they hear that in the background, they might think, well, this position requires too many hours, or this position, they will come up with things in their mind that might rule you out as a potential future employee. Not saying that that is right, but that could happen. If they hear certain music in the background, if they hear anything besides, quiet, distraction free, it's not just for you, it's on their end too. So you're basically kind of making sure that all of those distractions and all of those biases, as best as possible, are eliminated, so that way you can move to the next step. So keep those in mind when you're thinking about going into that phone interview. Any questions so far? Okay. Check any sites like Glassdoor to see if there are common interview questions that are posted. Some of the employers who post a job most frequently will have some of those out there to look at. And if not, it's still helpful to kind of Google or kind of research whatever industry or field you're getting into. For example, what is the typical interview for a registered nurse look like? Or what does the typical interview for an executive administrative assistant position look like? So whatever the case may be with any position, just Google it, get prepared, just kind of wrap your brain around what might be some more common questions, so you can kind of get in front of that. Practice talking about your knowledge, skills, and abilities out loud to yourself or with a friend. One thing that I've repeated over and over, and I see frequently, and people laugh about it, and there is sometimes a little bit of a ribbing or a joke, but women, in my experience, are not as good as talking about themselves in a positive note or selling themselves as much as I see with interacting with men. So what I hear is that you might feel as though you do a good job, but you're really quiet about it. You don't really sell yourself. You don't really think about what you bring to the table. You just know that you go in and you bust your hump and you try to do a really good job at work, but you really don't put into words or really take the time to understand how that brings value to the table at your employer. So I think one thing that, as maybe a side note here, when we think about that, is maybe writing down a list of things that you do well or things that you feel are positive, or maybe asking a couple of your coworkers, what are some things that you think that I do a good job at, or even your current manager, what do you think I do well? Maybe just a starting point. If you can't think of it, ask others around you, and especially those that you trust that will give you that unbiased feedback. The worst thing you want to hear is, oh, you just do a great job at everything. No, I don't want to hear that. I think that you really need a good grasp of, if you don't really feel as though you know what you do well, and you do, but really kind of explore that and feel that out, and then practice about talking about it. So you could say, I think the one thing that I've identified that I'm the best at my job is that I really dig into policies and procedures. And when something comes up, I really understand the full process and procedure of X, Y, or Z. I'll give you an example, and then you can kind of give examples of how, highlighting your skill set. But get in practice of talking about it in a positive manner, positive about yourself, what you bring to the table, and that will help with those discussions. Research common company interview questions, be prepared to answer. That's another bullet point, kind of ties into the other one. And then be prepared to talk about compensation if the interviewer brings it That's an important note to underscore there. So why would you not want to bring up the compensation first?
Someone may
Um,
believe, go ahead, Gloria.
um, I would. I've just always been told that if it does come up, it shouldn't be you being the person who brings it up. I never understood why, and I would like to know your perspective on that. But I've just always been conditioned to let the employer bring that up and you not be the one to first introduce it.
Okay, so a couple of perspectives on that, right, wrong, or indifferent. So what can be construed from that is if the person brings up the compensation first, is that that is the only reason that they want the position is because they're looking for an increase in compensation, which might be the truth. It might be. But you can't, it's, again, it goes kind of back to that game, or it's like, gosh, I'm not gonna compare anything else, but it can be sometimes a game or a back and forth of, well, the employer's like, well, the only reason they want to move over here is compensation, which means if they get a better deal somewhere else, they're just going to leave us anyways. You never want to kind of give that impression. It's more of, yes, compensation is important, but one of the things that you'll tie back a conversation is, I want to work for your company because of X, Y, or Z, meaning the values, the core values of the company, the culture of the company. That is my main draw. Compensation is part of that as well, but that's not the first and foremost draw. So whenever you verbalize it first, then it paints the picture to the receiving end that maybe the compensation is the most important thing to you, and you never want to lead with that. Does that help, or did that create more questions?
That was good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. So again, and it might be, and this is kind of where we do this dance, right? That might be the most important thing to you. Maybe you're at our employer that you've been doing the same job for the last couple of years, and you know from the market pay or from competitors that you're being underpaid. Maybe your big draw is compensation, but you need to underscore the company, which is why too. It's not always compensation. Uh-oh, my internet connection is unstable. Can you guys see and hear me?
You're frozen, but we can hear you, or I can hear you, I guess I should say.
Okay. Should I stop sharing and try to share again? Am I frozen still?
Yeah, you're frozen, but I can still see your screen. Can
Oh, good. Okay.
Yep. Oh, you're
That's fine.
unfrozen.
Okay. I'm unfrozen now.
Yep, you're good.
Yay! All right. Okay. So again, I go back to it's kind of like a game and a back and forth, and sometimes I liken it to like a cat and mouse game, right? And sometimes, and some people that I work with are very direct. They really hate this process. They just want to get to the job, but sometimes you have to kind of play those games as you go through. So again, feel free to ask questions. We'll kind of talk through it. So. Okay.
Quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Quick question. So if someone, like Gloria was saying, she wasn't sure why it was a problem, and I believe that you did answer that, which is very nice. But let's say a person was in the habit of posing a question or a comment about pay before the employer brought it up. What might be an acceptable way to bring it up early, such as in the phone interview process? I have honestly gone through situations where I didn't know what the pay was going to be like until even after they said, yeah, we want to hire you for the position. And during that conversation, they didn't say anything about the pay. It was
Oh.
very early on, and it was a certain type of position. But I guess either the interviewer assumed I knew, or maybe they thought someone else talked to me about it. So I can understand, why Gloria might say, yeah, I don't understand why it's an issue or why it should be a problem. So what's a good way to pose it?
It depends on where you're at. So I will tell you, I probably don't think highly about the people that interviewed you if they didn't mention compensation, because that's a huge piece of it. So I will kind of give you some insight, knowledge of why I do and kind of my process. And then I'll kind of give some feedback there. So I am not, so I have metrics that am with any job. So even though I'm kind of coaching and walking through and talking to you now, I'm still held accountable for my job. And I have metrics that I need to have time to fill. There are things that I need to make sure that I do on my end to make sure that we have a quality hire. One of the things that I tend to vet out very quickly, and one of my mentors had taught me that the rules of ABC, always be closing. So even though I am in a support position, filling positions, I'm still in a way a salesperson. So when I have someone who I would say that I have on the hook or I feel like is always a good candidate, that always be closing is you talk about compensation as not as soon as possible, but you don't want to go down a rabbit hole and waste everyone's time. So waste the candidate's time, waste the hiring manager's time, waste your time. So a lot of times, and especially you are going to hear now, and ladies, I want to make sure that you really hear this and are tuned into this piece of it. There are a lot of laws changing with the Fair Pay Act, where and laws are changing per state. Not every state has adapted to this yet, but companies are adapting to it, where companies that used to would ask, what is your current rate of compensation? I would refrain from answering that. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes here. But one of the things that companies should be doing or should be adopting to doing, you'll start seeing more of, is they will say, this position typically pays around $45,000 to $55,000, depending upon experience. Is that a comfortable range for you? And then you can respond accordingly. So you could say, you know, it potentially could be a comfortable range depending upon, you know, what you're looking at. I know that my skill set and the skill set in what I bring to the table probably weren't on the higher end of that range, but I'm certainly open to next level conversation. You can kind of handle it that way. So don't pigeonhole yourself into yes, I will take $40,000 or I'll take $45,000. You kind of talk around it a little bit. Now, when you're in a situation where no one has talked to you about compensation, I think it's very important to circle back to either the recruiter or the hiring manager or whoever and say, you know, I think one of the things that some of the things that we've talked through, I'm really excited about this opportunity. I'm really thankful for the time that everyone's spending with me. However, I have a couple questions about the process. You know, I've not heard anything about benefits or compensation. And so, you know, while I'm interested in the opportunity, I think a few of those things that I kind of need to think through and my family need to think through in regards to when I consider this opportunity are something that need to be addressed. You know who I speak with about something like that. And so you're not asking, you know, how much does this job pay? You're kind of saying, you know, as a family dynamic or as, you know, as I'm thinking about this opportunity and we're looking to move forward, you know, who would I talk to about that? And then they'll say, oh, it's HR. I'll go ahead and contact so-and-so. And then you can go back and say, oh, the hiring manager told me that we needed to talk about compensation. Do you have a few minutes to talk about that? And then it kind of, do you see how that's a more soft approach? Or again, it's kind of a cat and mouse, but you know, you are saying, you're kind of finding, you're playing innocent, if that makes sense. You do have a direct question, but you're kind of softening the approach of how you're getting that answer. Does that help, or are there more questions about that?
Thank you, Renee. That's very open and very helpful. I'm sure that we can both appreciate that.
Good. All right. So we'll kind of navigate next steps. And again, if there's other questions, feel free to stop me. So we talked about this a little bit ago. Why are you interested in working for the company? We've already addressed that. And I'm not going to address every one of these. Let me ask this. Instead of me going through each bullet point, let's take just a quick second if you have not already reviewed these. What questions maybe stand out here that we have questions on or want further dialogue around?
Well, let's see. For me, I think we covered what are your salary. Well, we didn't really cover what are your salary requirements, but I guess, you did give us a good explanation of how that might work early in the interview process.
Well, and I'll pause there. So let's talk about that. I think and I hate when this happens, so it's a good tip for you, is when I ask as a recruiter, what are your salary requirements? The person can then flip that on the recruiter and ask and say, well, I feel like my skill set aligns pretty well with what is being asked or being considered for the position. Can you give me the range of what the typical pay is for this particular position? And let them answer that.
Okay. One that sometimes trips me up is the second bullet point. What reasons do you have for leaving your current or most recent job? What are they looking for there? Why would they ask that?
You can truly get a lot or understand a lot about a candidate through that question. And what I mean by that is, and I'll go with the most probably immature response or the most cringe response to that is going to be, oh, my boss is just terrible. My boss is overpowering. It's just, I'm treated terribly here. When you hear that, you're like, no, I don't want to move forward with this person. What are they saying about their company on social media? Who are they trashing their company to? That gives us a lot of red flags along the way. An acceptable answer, or things that are probably more true, are going to be more of, I think that I'm looking for a new challenging opportunity. So I've been doing this role for 2 or 3 years. I know that the role that you're offering is similar to what I'm doing, but it's going to offer me a challenge and a change in that So you would have to probably list something there of why you feel it's going to be challenging to you. Or you could say, I have hit a ceiling. There is not a lot of growth opportunity for me at this point. With the company, I've kind of hit where my wall is here. And at this point, I'm looking for better growth opportunity. So some things like that, which are understandable, right? And even if it's compensation related, that still kind of falls, in my opinion, under the growth excuse, right? Or the growth reasoning, where you can say, I'm looking to grow in my career. They don't need to know what that growth means. That generally answers that for them, unless they ask more granular questions. Be careful with that. But generally, that's a good enough reasoning for them, is I'm looking for better growth opportunity with the company.
Thank you. That was helpful. I do have another one, but I'll give Gloria an opportunity to ask or to bring up one of the points.
Actually, the one that you just mentioned was the one that stood out the most to me. And so that actually, you answered my question when you responded to her question.
Perfect.
Okay, all right, great, Gloria. I do have one more, another bullet point there. I've often wondered, let's see here, the third bullet point, have you ever been involuntarily terminated? If yes, explain. Tell me how the process works on that. That has not happened to me, but let's say, for instance, if it does in the future, or if it had, how much information does the person already have about me that is interviewing me? What if I don't want to tell them that I was fired? How does that work?
Well, nowadays with background checks and background companies, they're probably going to uncover it anyways. And if you did not disclose that, and I will tell you, I just recently had the situation, and I'll explain it. Actually, I'll just give you the example. So I interviewed somebody, again, playing Columbo. If you don't know what Columbo is, go ahead and research it. But basically, you're just playing nice, and you get these answers, right? And then you kind of puzzle piece it together like a detective to get the real story. But I asked along the process, what's making you leave your current company? And the person said, well, I left X company because I was recruited. I left the other X company because I was recruited. And then, and now I'm here and this isn't working out for me. They don't have the book of business I need. So I'm really interested in this opportunity. Great. So we went through the whole process. we actually moved forward and presented an offer to the candidate, and then started a background check. Now, again, mine are more specialized background checks because they have a government regulated licensing that's involved. But the person in background, through the background company, disclosed that they were terminated. And so the notes that we had, and this could be either in an application, not with us, but it could be in the application process where they ask check mark if you were terminated. Or in my case, I have my pre-screen notes. So I usually have notes when we're talking, because if there's any case of, and again, we're government regulated or we're regulated as employers, I have notes to back up what our conversations sound like, or a kind of the discovery. So if there's any type of lawsuit or anything that comes throughout the path, I have documented discussions that we've had already. And that's very serious and heavy, but that's part of my job. I make sure we take notes. So in my notes, I have in there that the person said that they were recruited, and then they disclosed to us after they had an accepted offer that they were terminated. And so, again, going back to, I told you the business segment that I work in is government regulated. We're also ethically regulated, where when we see things like that, that to us is more of kind of a red flag, that could be an ethics thing where they've tried to cover up something or they have omitted something. So we went through the process and we ended up resending the offer to the candidate. And the candidate, came back and said, well, that was just an oversight. It was a miscommunication. But when you have a termination and you're asked why you leave your company, to omit something like that, it was a bigger omission. We found out why, to us was an ethical violation or an ethical issue. So I would always make sure that we disclose that. So if the application says, have you ever been terminated? Click check mark the yes, and then provide a high level explanation. They don't, at that point, you do not have to give them nitty gritty. You can be high level. And then if they really are concerned about that and they want to dig in, then you go ahead and you can explain and talk around what that was, and kind of talk through that. That's a whole nother ball game. But if they find out somewhere along the way that you have potentially omitted or have not been truthful about that, then that's the quickest way to be ruled out of the process or to have an offer rescinded.
That is very, very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else on this one? Okay, I will highlight the last one. So what questions can I answer for you? Unless you are what I would consider a veteran, and when I mean not a veteran with the military, I mean like a veteran in your field. So unless you are a nurse practitioner, or a nurse that has been in the field for 25 years, and I ask you, what questions might you have for me? You could even come back and say, I've been doing this role for the past 25 years. I don't have a lot of questions about the role. But you also want to provide something, right? So it could be, the one thing I do have, I've researched online. I've kind of feel like I know a little bit about your company, but really I'd like to hear from you. What do you feel like the culture at your company is like? So something small. It doesn't have to be, anything huge or groundbreaking, but you'll want to know, you want to give some type of a question to show that you're engaged and that you're curious about the company. That will kind of let the recruiter and the company know that you are engaged and it seems like you want to develop that relationship further. So I would encourage you when they do ask you, do you have any questions, to not say, oh no, I don't have any questions this time. You want to come up with something or have something prepared. All right, unless there's any questions, I'll move forward to the next one. Okay. So prepare. You can never prepare too much, which is absolutely correct. Being well prepared can help you ease your mind. We do see that people get highly nervous. Some people, I've known people who've broken out in hives. They sweat. They just get jitters. They get so nervous because you're walking into a situation that is more of an unknown, which is common. We as humans don't generally like to walk into things that are unknown. But if you prepare yourself and have a list of interview questions that we talked about earlier, so even the previous slide, or just like going on Glassdoor or Googling general interview questions and be prepared that way, you should be able to kind of pivot yourself and understand kind of how to navigate some of those questions. But I would encourage and suggest to do the homework and make sure that you're preparing. It's a little bit of a bummer because it's extra work that needs to be done, or what if they don't ask these questions? But you always want to make sure that you are the going to the next round. So if you don't want to look at it as, if you're looking at it as this is extra work, this is extra, I don't want to have to do all this, look at it as, how can I, maybe you're competitive. Think about it this way. How can I beat other people? How can I beat them out for this role? Maybe that'll help you condition yourself for condition and make sure you're preparing for those conversations. But this is very, very important. Let's see here. Practice answering questions. Practice out loud with a friend. You might know, and I will tell you that even though I'm kind of talking with you and having dialogue with you now, there are times when a good old-fashioned paper and pen for me, or just typing out kind of what I'm going to say before I go into an important presentation with our leadership or whatever the case may be, just having a general idea of what I'm going to say and actually practicing out loud is very helpful. They do this in like speech class, speech 101. I would encourage you, again though, when you're talking to a friend or to a family member, please do not choose the person who is always like your cheerleader, right? You don't want to walk into a meeting and you're like, oh, my friend said this was great, and they're always your nice friend. You don't want that. You want your friend who's your devil advocate. So if that might be your best friend that tells you that your hair looks terrible that day, or that you need to go change your clothes, or, pick that person who's actually going to be true to you and make sure that they're sharpening your skills, versus one that's telling you everything's okay. So if they say, well, when you set up this way, it really sounded like this, we probably need to try that a little differently. You want to hear that. You want to hear that feedback from that person and practice out loud your conversation to help sharpen your skills. Don't try to memorize answers, just work on how you sound. Again, going back to that authenticity. When I hear a candidate who has given me a canned answer, it sometimes is disappointing. Maybe we've had a good conversation and they give me a canned answer and I'm like, it can be disappointing. You want to know the person, you want to build that relationship. So making sure you're giving more of that genuine answer, if that helps. And then again, be prepared for examples. So if they ask a question, if the employer asks you a question directly, be prepared to back that up. Have we gone over the STAR method at all for like interviewing?
We haven't today,
Okay.
but I'm familiar with it.
Good.
Yep,
if
that's
you're not
tomorrow's session.
Oh, good. Okay, so you'll get into it. You
Yep,
know what I'm
tomorrow.
saying. But again, going back to that good old-fashioned competition, if you answer something and you don't provide context about how amazing you are, I know that sounds very corny, but you want to basically highlight for them how great and how amazing you are. So it goes back to talking about yourself, making sure that you are talking about how great you are and presenting your skill set. But that STAR method for interviewing will help you provide examples to them to showcase. So it's kind of like, I don't know if you've heard this, but I remember in math class when my teacher, I would have an answer and she'd go, show your work. And I'm like, really? This is ridiculous. I have the answer. But that's kind of what it is. I feel like they're asking you to show your work. So present dialogue to me and show your work that you, how great you are. You might be telling me, oh, I'm amazing. I'm great at this. Well, give me an example and show me how, right? Okay, any questions so far before we get into this slide? Okay, final preparation. So 30 minutes prior to your phone interview, sit at a desk or a table where you can organize your paperwork, sit up and straighten and prepare to talk. Why do we feel like that's an important bullet point?
For me, it helps to organize my thoughts and calm myself down, and also to prepare that I have what I need right in front of me when that interview starts.
Yep. One thing we like to kind of talk about and think through is your mental mindset. So yes, be prepared. The other is, and we'll kind of go through here, and I think it might be on here as well, but one thing that we've talked about is making sure you're dressed and prepared for the interview. So as a best practice, and I do a lot of this conversation with veterans as well. You'd be surprised. You would think that our veterans, with kind of everything that they've gone through and their backgrounds and the environment that they work in, that interviewing would be a breeze for them. And usually what I find is that they are just as nervous as everyone else. But we kind of talk through all of these interview pieces about how to, adjust to a civilian interview, or to kind of talk through. And one of the best practices that we've identified and have is that prepare and dress for the interview. So even though it's a phone interview, I would not wear your pajamas. I would not wear your comfortable yoga pants. It might be just enough to put on a nice blouse and a nice, nice pair of trousers or skirt or whatever the case may be. But something to kind of help your mental mindset get into the mode or get into the swing of it is something that's helpful, in addition to making sure that you are sitting up and you're not on the couch. Because the first thing you do is, if you are in comfortable clothes or if you're uncomfortable, a comfortable couch, you become more relaxed, and you don't want to be in a relaxed mindset. You want to be sharp. So again, what we talked about is making sure your mental mindset is there. Those are all things that are very helpful. Make sure your phone is charged. That is one excuse to not have, is if you've agreed upon a meeting time ahead of time and they're not calling you off the cuff, for you to not have your phone charged and it goes directly to voicemail. That can be a deal breaker. They might even call you back. They might just move on to the next person. Now, of course, if it's a phone interview, I will speak for myself in saying that there's been plenty of times where, your voicemail carrier, or whoever your carrier is, your phone carrier, goes straight to voicemail because it's a bad area. The signal's bad. There are those hiccups. But if they can't simply get a hold of you, or you tried a couple back and forth and your phone's not charged, they're just going to pass, because it just shows you're not prepared. We talked about the bias, so make sure your children, pets, or other distractions are out of the room. Have a copy of your resume cover letter to make sure it's a correct one. I will tell you, in my career path, at some point when I interviewed somewhere, they asked me, what do you have to share with us that's not on your resume? And I was like, what's on my resume? So I had to kind of think through. I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I answer this question? So just be prepared to maybe have the resume in front of you so you can do a cursory glance at it. But make sure you're prepared to answer questions on that, and have a copy of the job listing. We talked about that. Have your notes that you made during the research. Oftentimes when we get nervous, your mind tends to blank out. If you have notes in front of you about the company that you've already taken, you've done your research, that's often very helpful. Have a glass of water available. I will tell you, I think people get, and I certainly do myself, I get the good old-fashioned cotton mouth, where it's hard to swallow. It's hard to have enough saliva to talk because you get so nervous your mouth dries out. It's always good to have a little glass of water next to you so you can actually, if you are nervous, kind of wet the whistle is what I would call it. So do a final run through of your answers. Be aware of time limits. If you are having a very engaging dialogue and conversation with the interviewer or the recruiter, be conscious of time. If they told you it's a half hour, you could probably call out and just say, hey, I'm so sorry. I know that we're having a great dialogue. We're getting close to time. Do you have a few more minutes to kind of walk through some of these examples you're asking, or are we pressed for time? So it's very respectful. It shows that you're respecting the person in the conversation, that they might have other appointments. And that is, that's a kind of a plus for you, brownie points for you, I guess I should say. Focus in hand and tune out any distractions. That's usually a given. Nowadays, with everything going on, and working from home and taking calls from home, I think people are a little more flexible with this, but in an interview, you want to rule that all out. Like right now, I can tell you my children are away. We have them, they're distracted. My husband's in the other room. I've tried to eliminate as many distractions as possible on this call out of respect, but I would say the same would be the same with an interview, is to make sure that you have all those eliminated as best possible. The other thing I talk about, and I think we'll put a unique spin on this one, is stay calm, take deep breaths, and think positively. So when I say think positively, there are times where we tend to get into our own heads and have a negative mental dialogue, or mental, I would say we tend to tear ourselves down the most. We're our own worst enemies at some point. I think if you look at the perspective of, The reason that you are in this phone interview or you are being interviewed is because your resume stood out, your skills stood out, so they want to continue dialogue. So think of that as positive, as they picked you out of a ton of applications and resumes. They picked you to have the conversation with you. So to think that way. And the other thing would be that calming. So I have, excuse me, I have a little squishy that I use, like if I need to kind of calm myself or kind of just distract myself. There have been times where I love Play-Doh. So my kids' Play-Doh, I'm often stealing that and kind of just having something to do with my hands. For me, that's a very calming thing to have something to do with my hands when I get into a nervous situation. You are in a phone interview, so they can't really see your behaviors. So if there is anything helpful, if your mind is racing, I have in the past, or I've had people pick up in the past where they take a pen and paper and they kind of doodle while they're talking and keep their mind focused. And that way it's not racing all over the place. If there are little tips and tricks, and just try things out that work for you if you are nervous, that you can do to kind of soothe and calm yourself while you're in that situation and that conversation with that recruiter. Any questions on this slide or any questions so far?
I do have a quick question that came up as you were going through some of that. Thank you for clarifying those points. So, as far as you being the interviewer, if the person you were interviewing was not selected for the job, but they wanted you to give them some open feedback on how the interview went and what you thought about them as a candidate, when would be the time that you would most want to be asked a question like that?
Probably well, and it depends. So here's a couple of things we'll navigate. That opens up a bigger question. Is there a company is not going to want to give you that feedback? And are there any guesses as to why we're not going to want to give you that feedback?
Well, I guess the person being interviewed could say, okay, so why didn't you hire me? It could go further than that. But for me personally, it would just be a learning experience, such as, oh, yeah, maybe I don't want to ask that question in the future, or maybe I want to take more time to be more confident and relaxed, things like that.
I will tell you, that's more of a one-off or a rarity. And the reason I say that is the company does not want to engage in that kind of conversation about a potential true reason why you're rejected. They do not want to open up the potential for discovery or litigation. So while on the candidate's end, it could be a very innocent ask of they just want self-improvement. They want to understand why they weren't selected. What I would tell you, I would say probably 99% of the time you're going to get is a very generic answer. And I will be very open with you and tell you, I feel like that's a sad state of affairs, because you truly have people who want to develop themselves and be better and really understand why maybe they weren't selected in the process. You can ask that question. You can definitely ask it. So if you are not picked and you got a rejection email, or if you were not selected and the person gives you a call and tells you that, you can ask, I would probably ask along the lines of, are there things that I can do to improve my skill set, or things that I can do to improve to be considered next time, is probably how I would phrase it. You're probably going to get more feedback there. If you phrase it and ask, could you tell me why I was not selected for next steps? You're going to get a very generic answer. They're not going to tell you, well, you were really nervous during the interview process, or this, that, or the other. They're very careful and guarded about what they say, because there have been so many instances where there has been litigation that's usually the primary concern that they have is the person going to think that we discriminated against them somehow? Generally it's a very fair reason as to why they weren't selected, but they're probably not going to have a very transparent dialogue. It's going to be, they'll probably give you a generic reason that's probably tends to be what it really was, but they're not going to give you very granular feedback, unfortunately.
Thank you, Renee. I appreciate you taking time to expose that or to reveal it. It's very helpful.
Okay. So let's move on to the next one. During the phone interview, so no smoking or chewing gum. I've had people smoke on the phone. You can hear the intake. Again, chewing gum. People might do that to again with their whistle, but you can hear the gum smacking. I can think of my mom telling me that, close your mouth. You sound like a cow chewing with cud in its mouth, or whatever the phrase was when I was a kid. But just make sure that. It's my husband being nosy. Answer the phone and greet, and using your name. Don't say hi, what's up. We have, when you are interviewing for places, they really want you to answer the phone. It is very encouraging when you answer with your name. The downside to that is there are so many solicitors that are calling that you really don't want to give out your name and your private information. So you can say hello, that's fine, but make sure that you're not being very relaxed again with like talking to your friends, things like that. Be careful with that. Write down the name of the person with whom you're speaking. It's always nice to kind of circle back at the end of the conversation and say, thank you, Rebecca, or whoever, I appreciate your time today. That's just a nice touch. Just a nice touch to help you. Listen and don't interrupt. I hire salespeople. I hire a lot of salespeople, and sometimes I deal with, I would say sometimes egos that need to be stroked. And if they are constantly interrupting, it's not just that it's rude. It's not as though I feel like it's rude. The lens that I look through is, if I have a client that's sitting in front of you and they have their finances and they have concerns and they're trying to help you as a person understand their finances so you can help them with their finances and get them in a good position in life to help them, and all you're doing is interrupting the dialogue that we're having, are you going to do the same thing to our clients? Are you going to be able to sit down and actually listen to our clients? Or do you have such a large ego that it's all about you and the money that you're going to earn? And is that going to be that your draw for the position, and that you're not going to be reflective of our values and welcome and forward thinking? So that small amount, do you see where I just went with that listen and don't interrupt, how far I went with that and painted a picture of, it's not just a rude. I'm thinking so many steps ahead of how you're going to fit in with our company, our culture. If you're doing that to me now, and this is supposed to be when you're on your quote unquote, your best behavior, you're probably gonna do this to our customers, and I'm not interested in that. Slow down your speaking, take deep breaths. Again, and kind of going back to some of those things that I mentioned earlier is, a squish ball or, doodling or whatever you might do to kind of help calm yourself, to take deep breaths. If you speak too fast, you might be really nervous, and it is a nervous situation. But if I'm thinking about a position where you have to interact with maybe directors or presidents, or leadership in general, or you have to present, there's something to present. If you are nervous on the call with me, am I going to be able to present you as a candidate that's going to do well with the audience that I present you to? So keep those things in mind depending on what you're applying for. Take notes on important points. So if there's something that strikes your fancy or something that comes up that maybe you want to have more dialogue on, take note of it. And when they open up at the end and say, are there any more questions? Those are things that you can really kind of go back to. Avoid selfish questions. Those are usually of, how many hours do I have to work? Those type of things where, that's not really showcasing yourself in a positive light. Don't hang up without asking the next steps in the process. Too oftentimes I hear from people and they say, oh, thank you, have a great day, appreciate your time. But they don't ask, what should I expect as far as next steps? That gives you a true understanding of maybe what that process looks like. And then and follow up with them. Say, you told me that I might hear back in a week. If I don't hear back from you in a week, are you open to me emailing or calling you? What is your preference? So making sure that you're kind of making that connection, so that way you're not just hanging in the breeze there, and just not understanding what the next direction is. And then lastly, thank the interviewer before hanging up. If the interviewer has emailed you, I would strongly encourage a follow-up email thanking them, not just not just on the phone thanking them, but the first thing I do when a candidate thanks me via email, I forward that to the hiring manager. because that gives the hiring manager a good idea of the professionalism of that candidate. And again, that's just my practice. I'm not sure all recruiters do that, but that's something I commonly do, is send the email on so the manager gets a good idea of kind of the cadence and the follow-up and the respectfulness of the interviewee. I know we're coming close on time here. Any questions so far that I can answer? Okay. I'll ask one more time before we move forward. So again, remember that the interview is not just a one-sided evaluation. I know what we hear all the time is, I'm so nervous. What are they going to think of me? It's all about what you think of them. So one of the things that you really want to keep present of mind, and again, we're getting close to time here, but present of mind is you are selecting them for a future opportunity and for usually a tenure and longevity. You don't just want to job hop. Nobody likes job hopping. The worst thing would be to do is to take yourself from what I would say, that old phrase of the frying pan to the fire. You don't want to be so desperate to leave your current employer that you don't do the effective research and really evaluate who you're going to, because it could be at some point that you might have to quit there because you have a terrible manager that you just suddenly have, or the work environment's terrible. So keep in mind that it's not just us evaluating you, it's you evaluating us and making sure that, you know, this is going to be a good fit for you along the way. We talked about that, send a thank you immediately. Let's go back to that. Highlight. So again, don't just say thank you, make a point of reiterating your strengths and your value to the company. So make sure you highlight that. And that's kind of when we talk about writing down your strengths and what you do well, making sure you kind of go back to those points. Bombing, we talked about not asking questions. You've done no research on the company, so you don't know anything about the company. We talked about that earlier, address that. Being too casual, we've addressed all these along the way. And then answering the question, I don't know. I think one thing to note here is if you don't know the answer, say, you know, I've not experienced that. However, this is probably how I would handle that situation. Give at least a good understanding of how you would handle it and give them a good idea of you handling that situation in general. And then salary and benefits, we already addressed that piece of it. So again, thank them, looking forward to next steps. What are the next steps in the process? And then let them know that you're still interested in the position and they'll kind of move that forward. What questions do we have about just the general questions today? I know, again, we're a little bit past time, but if you have a few minutes, I'm open to answer any kind of questions you have or anything that you might have encountered that you have questions on.
I would say I really do appreciate this workshop because I actually have an interview today. It's for a scholarship, but a lot of the information that we covered kind of put my mind at ease of things that I could do to make the meeting productive. My biggest concern for my meeting that I have today is that there isn't a lot of research available for the scholarship. It's a scholarship that's given only once every 4 years, and they've narrowed down hundreds of candidates to grant 5 interviews between today and tomorrow. But the scholarship, oh, I apologize, my computer just turned on. But there wasn't a lot of information available on the scholarship or who the benefactors were or anything like that. And I'm just worried that if they ask me, well, what do you know about us? There isn't any information. So I'm just worried. So I just kind of jotted down what they're looking for in their candidate and how my skills or my experiences align with what their description of what they were looking for.
Well, first off, I would say congratulations on getting this far in the process. To be competitive and eliminate the rest of the competition, to be able to interview is a huge win already. So be happy with that. I think the one thing what you're saying is you have adapted the best as possible. So it sounds like with all the social media and all of the Google tools and everything out there, if they're not presenting a lot of information, if they ask you, you can probably call out and just say, you know, I've done my due diligence. I've really worked to do some research. I did have some limitations in finding some background on the company or the organization or the benefactors. this is what I do know. However, and let them know what you know. This is what I found. This is what my understanding is. But I was hoping that maybe you can give me some better understanding because I did have limitations in research. I mean, it really depends upon what that was for. Now, if it's a grant or a scholarship on research, then that's not a great thing. But you can open that up and just let them know this is the research that I did. I did have some troubles. Or is it under? And I'm a little ignorant, and I apologize on some of what the benefactors and scholarships look like. But is there a certain website or a certain area that they can point you towards? And being sometimes open about that and saying, is there a place you can direct me to answer those questions, further questions, can be helpful as well.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you, Renee. That was a very helpful class. I don't have any additional questions at this time, but I do appreciate your willingness to help us and answer the questions that we've had.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you very much. If you do have any follow-up questions or, would like some insight, feel free to reach out to Tiffany for my contact information, for my work email address. I'm very welcome to answer questions that I can along the way as well. So thank you for your time. Good luck with each of you for your future endeavors, your interviews, especially the scholarship. I hope that you obtain that. That's definitely a big win on your end. But good luck with future endeavors. If you need anything, feel free to reach out, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Rachel. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.